So I had one of those unfortunate moments where I walked out to my waiting room and two of my clients were sitting there, and I'd stuffed up, made a double booking. I arranged what to do. And then the next time my other client turned up for their session, they said to me, Ruth, you were testing me, weren't you? That's mistrust abuse schema. And that's the schema we're talking about today. Welcome to 7 Minute Schemas. I'm Ruth Holt.
And I'm Rita Younan, and we're both Advanced Schema Therapists, supervisor trainers. And yeah, mistrust abuse, perhaps it's worth kind of talking a little bit about the way it might present in the room. So, there might be kind of more that anxious, kind of fearful presentation in the room, surrendering to that schema. There might be more of a hypervigilant kind of, not trusting, kind of suspiciousness that you notice in the room. And this particular schema is quite common in forensic patients, and so you might find it feels a kind of predator and conning and manipulative mode.
It can be much more subtle because you think about clients who have been in an early environment which was not safe, where they were not protected. They might have experienced physical or sexual abuse. What they learnt in that moment was the world is not safe, but also people are not there to protect them. So when they start to come for therapy, we as clinicians might assume that they feel safe in the room, they might feel comfortable to share, but actually their whole system, their body, their emotions, their thoughts are telling them this is not a safe person.
Yeah, and sometimes, even though you've got a smile on your face and you've got a very welcoming and warm face in the room, that still activates the mistrust abuse schema. Sometimes that can actually be a trigger, particularly for people who are abused by somebody who had a smile on their face before it happened. Stephen Porges also talks about this idea of neuroception and how that in our intimate relationships, if the attachment experience was one of what you just described, that our body isn't able to sense whether someone's safe or not safe. And how many times have we been in the therapy room where we've got patients who have consistently partnered up with someone who's mistrusting or abusive or gone out for the weekend and somehow, gotten to themselves in a very vulnerable situation. And he talks about this inability to work out what is safe and what's not safe.
Yeah, and I talk about that sometimes with clients as being their radar. Their radar is a bit wonky. They have learnt to trust unsafe people, and they've learnt to not trust potentially safe people. So part of what our goals are in therapy is to realign that radar, initially using the therapy relationship as a safe place. So teaching safety, not just in terms of how we relate to the person, but how they feel in their body. So helping them to tune into their body sensations and connecting with those sensations and telling us, so that we can together work out how to incorporate those feelings of safety in the room. I think it's really also important that we're not too quick to rush into, really difficult experiential work with these clients, because what they need is actually sense of control. That's one thing that's been taken away from them often with abuse, is they are disempowered. They've experienced relationships as frightening, as feelings of helplessness, as being nobody there to protect them. So we want a limited reparenting relationship that's safe, that's empowering, and that's connected to them in a really attuned way.
Another potential intervention with the mistrust abuse schema is to think about some of the cognitive techniques that Jeff Young talks about, looking at whether some of my patients, for example, might kind of feel that there's mistrust in the relationship, but kind of looking at some of the evidence to suggest that actually the therapeutic relationship has been a trusting one, that Rita has always been consistent, Rita's been predictable, Rita hasn't done anything intentional to hurt me, etc., etc. And so just kind of some things to remind the vulnerable child that in fact it might feel this way, but the reality is in this relationship, it can be trusted, and to start to take some risks. And what might those risks look like in the therapeutic relationship? And that's some subtle behavioural pattern breaking as well.
Great point.
In fact, Ruth, Jeff Young reiterates in his book that it's really important to create safety in the relationship with the therapist and create that kind of stabilization that you're talking about before you start doing imagery rescripting with patients who have a strong mistrust abuse schema. In fact, I'm just curious about how this plays out in some of the couple schema therapy that you do.
Yeah, I think it's a really important area to address when you're working with couples, particularly if there's been sexual trauma. And typically couples have a lot of trouble then with having a sexual, relationship that works for both of them. Sometimes people get super avoidant. They don't want to have sex because, of course, it's got massive triggers for them. Or what they've learnt to do is detach while they're having sex in order to do that. And so what we don't want to do is keep traumatizing that vulnerable part of them that has learnt that sex is dangerous, sex is powerless, sex happens to you. We actually want to wind that back, help a couple to understand those trauma triggers, to work with it, to be able to communicate when someone's getting triggered and not use anger or guilt to coerce someone into sex, but actually working very slowly to rebuild safety in that relationship as well. So are there any particular pitfalls you think for therapists when they're working with someone with a mistrust abuse schema, Rita?
Perhaps if the therapist assumes there's more trust in the relationship than what there is, and perhaps pushing patients or clients to kind of do some of the experiential activities in order to facilitate treatment in schema therapy, and they may think that you're trying to humiliate them or that they don't trust your intentions. So just being mindful of having a more adequate gauge, if you like, of how much trust is in the therapeutic relationship to push some of those interventions.
And even actually asking that, right? So how safe does it feel here with me? Do you feel able to
Mm.
know how you're feeling? What is it I'm doing or not doing that builds safety and trust? And also, I think as we start to build that relationship of trust, then we can slowly work towards experiential work, making sure it's not their avoidant protector telling us that they're not ready. It's their healthy adult who's now tuning into that little abused child who needs to be safe. So that's our 7 minutes up, Rita. You can find further information on training and other online events that we're running to help people grow in their schema therapy knowledge at the end of this link.